I'm DJ.
And I'm Andrew.
Welcome to One Shot's Tavern,
a TTRPG podcast where we seek out new ways to tell stories through different systems and games.
So today's episode, we are talking about mainly Candela Obscura from Critical Role's Darrington Press.
It's a brand new game. It has been only out for a couple weeks now, but they've had a rules preview out for much longer than that. Love it when publishers do that. And we had the wonderful opportunity to have GM Danil from Start Playing Games run a session for us, and we got to really dive into kind of what makes this system tick.
Yeah, it was my first time playing a dark Lovecraftian mystery type game. Hopefully it won't be the last. I want to try them all. But it was definitely like I enjoyed it quite a bit. I enjoyed the story. And I enjoyed the mood and just kind of like this very almost Victorian-esque atmosphere. I thought that was super compelling. Yeah,
it's the system itself mechanically, right, is inspired a lot by Blades in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse. Systems that I have not played yet. I've heard a lot about them, and I'm sure we're going to be getting to in a future episode here.
They're on the list.
Yeah, they're definitely on the ever-growing list. But what was cool about this, and a big portion of what we'll be talking about before we get into showing you some of our awesome session and our conversation with Danil afterwards, is honestly the stakes that they play with in this world. So the world itself of Candela Obscura is kind of a faction-based episodic I guess game and world. So you're a part of an order within Candela Obscura, which is kind of like an anti-supernatural group. Not anti, you get what I'm saying though. They help deal with supernatural threats within a like Victorian kind of pseudo Lovecraftian world. And this is like further in like built on by the ideas of like bleed, which is like this other realm kind of energy coming in and whatnot, as well as just like I said, the episodic format that we're familiar in shows like Supernatural or X-Files or any of these like procedural cop shows. Honestly, it fits really well into that. And something Danil did really well that set the tone for me, at least, was narratively setting up scenes much more in a cinematic sense, talking about where the camera is and kind of introing things. We might even throw a clip in right here of him doing that.
We zoom in on the wife's face as she's sort of listening intently with like a faint smile. We can see, as it often is, that there is definitely some other thoughts going in her head in the background as she's listening and nodding along. When suddenly her expression changes to that of utter horror and shock. And as the camera moves back out, we see that the entire form of her husband ripples and melts into one puddle of reflective liquid. She stands up. We don't hear a noise as we are now looking through the window, but we see her screaming, panicking, sort of grabbing things and sort of grabbing her head. And we fade back into the fog.
But I loved how well the tone of the world that we are in and the episodic nature really drove me to kind of focus in on what mattered for this session and because it was a one shot, and also just like get familiar with what it means to kind of be a paranormal investigator.
Right. And the big thing with a setting or TTRPG like this is very much those descriptions of scenes, the soundscape, the music, like just building off this atmosphere, right? Because like a lot of these types of games, it's less likely that you're going to have like props and more likely you're going to have props, but less likely that you're going to have like terrain and a battle map, right? Because it is very much a narrative experience about what's going on. You might have them for some of like the small fights and stuff that happen throughout, but it's the system, the setting, it doesn't really work unless you are able to kind of creep into someone's subconscious with that music, with the eerie sound effects, you know, with a nice visual aid to set things up. And Danil did fantastic with that. I felt very much in the world, and as he was describing things, I was seeing it in my head, and it was a great time.
On that note, Danil runs games over on Start Playing Games. A lot of the GMs that we're going to be working with in the podcast will be in the same boat. DJ here also runs games over on Start Playing Games. You can hire these people. You can play in their games. This is totally accessible. Fortunately, I don't know if you're planning on it, but DJ is not running Candela Obscura right now, but Danil is.
Not yet.
And you can definitely take a look. We'll have links in our description and whatnot where you can join and play in some of these games and take it for a whirl yourself. Let us know what you think, if you enjoy it.
Yeah.
I want to get into one thing more as a general mechanic and GM advice, right? Because we could just do a review about this system. My short review is try it out. It's a lot of fun. There's a rules preview.
Definitely.
You can try it for free. If you've never played in a Powered by the Apocalypse game or a Blades in the Dark game, this is a great way to get into that from what I understand and what I've researched about those systems. Here's the part that I love. There are interesting story-driven stakes and consequences tied to what the players are doing and failure, right? So you look at, and again, we're always going to likely be comparing somewhat to Dungeons and Dragons because it's the Praetor of our experience in TTRPG. It's definitely not the pinnacle. Depending on,
not, but it is the pillar.
And it's often people's first experience in tabletop RPGs. Unlike one of our other coming interviews, he started on Powered by the Apocalypse, which is like fascinating,
fantastic, right? Yeah, it's
But what they do is there are 3 pools inside of your character sheet. Which you can take damage to, right? There's like a mental, a physical, and then bleed. I don't remember exactly what they're named. But basically the idea is there are different places where you can take damage, right? It's mental damage, it's physical damage, or it's like supernatural damage. And why does that matter? Oh, I have 3 health pools. Why it matters is once one of those pools fills up, right, with a certain amount of damage, you take on a scar, and
you get to choose the scar, and that's super cool,
right? Like, okay, so like I got, messed up by a ghost, right? That ghost was inside of me doing all kinds of stuff. Maybe I was possessed. Who knows? Like I took so much bleed damage, and it filled my bleed pool. I think it's called pool, but whatever. Yeah, I took too much bleed damage, and now I need to take a scar. Yep. What I then do is I take one of these points that's essentially like a skill proficiency, and I take it away from wherever it is, and I move it to something else to show what this experience did to me. Yeah, it's trauma.
Yeah.
How did this trauma change you? And 2 things happen right there. One, you can kind of min-max and try new stuff out, right? You can double down on something else. But also it pushes the player to realize narratively there are consequences for messing around in this world. If you take physical damage, maybe you've got a limp now, right? You have an inability with, acrobatics, right? But all of a sudden that wound has made you a lot more observant and cautious about getting into situations. And again, I'm going to put it in D&D terms. It may be now you have proficiency in like your initiative, or you have advantage on your initiative, and you get the jump on things now because you got hit hard and it got the jump on you last time, and you're not letting that happen again. Like that's awesome.
My character ended up essentially with PTSD over some of the things that was happening, right? It's like he was doing his best. He'd fail a roll. something terrible would happen, and all of a sudden now he is extremely cautious of that thing, right? So, for example, I couldn't look at mirrors anymore. Because I was terrified of looking at mirrors. And because of that, I was far more observant of my surroundings. So I kind of took it out of one thing, moved it into kind of my awareness, so that I could always be cognizant of the things around me at any given moment to avoid looking in reflections. And that was super, super fun, super cool, because it's like, oh, cool. I'm not stuck with the character I built, right? I am not stuck with the skills that I have, because we've all run into that situation in any TTRPG where we have spec'd out our character and we realize, oh crap, I messed up in building my character. I didn't even take into consideration this skill, and
Yeah.
nobody has it, and we are failing, right? And so with this, it's like, cool, your failure, your hurt, your terror, all of that can lead you as a character, as in real life, right, to reassess and just kind of like pay more attention and try harder in certain aspects.
Yeah.
That was super fun.
Now, the other thing is, again, we don't want to pretend like you could just go ham with these scars, right? Once you take 3 scars, I think you die, right? Like,
I believe that's it.
you're changed. This is a big deal, right? So it's not like, oh, I'm just constantly shifting my character and the player can like min-max like crazy, but you do get to show progression. That being said, I believe all of your pools reset after like the mission that you're on, the session that you're running.
Yeah, I believe that was it.
And there's a lot to this system that, you know, we're not professionals. We're not deeply versed on it. We just had the opportunity to play it. And again, the point of this podcast is to learn from other systems and adopt things for our own GMing.
Own
And maybe
games,
we
yeah.
adopt the system wholesale, right? Like, I'm excited about a lot of the systems we're going to run. That doesn't mean I'm going to play it for
Right.
or run it in my games, but I want it to do something to my gaming. I want to get better at this.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I think stakes is stakes and consequences, right? Is a deeply interesting thing that you should incorporate into your games. There are like lingering injuries in 5e in the DMG, like that's been in there since it came out,
Right.
you know, way back when. But not a lot of people use it. And it's also not relevant for every tone of game, right? It's not relevant for every
Right.
table. Some people just want to be a hero. They want to be a shiny golden knight with nothing wrong with them. They don't want to like have deep trauma, and that's not what they're going for. So talk to your players.
Yeah.
Find out what the stakes and consequences that they're interested in playing with are. And depending on the genre of the game you're in, you know, like that might be cranked up a little bit. Just, you know, in a horror game, you know, Danil checked with us in advance, and a lot of these GMs that run these games heavily rely on safety tools, which, you know, we'll have a future episode about safety tools and lines and veils and stuff like that, I'm sure. But basically, it's you got to make sure that everybody's bought in on consequences. You know, you can't just go like cutting off a player's arm without them being excited about what's going to happen as a result. I say that because I've cut off DJ's character's arm. I guess
true.
I didn't. I didn't do it.
Actually, it was another player who did it for me. It was an emergency situation. We needed to. But yeah,
like,
I mean, along those lines, I have been kind of adopting some of these ideas in the 5e games that I'm running, and also the Cypher games that I'm running, and whatever game I'm running. So it's like, hey, until you reach this certain point, I want you to know that as a player character, you're safe from death. However, you are not safe from the consequences, right? And so, and I told them, I was like, hey, we're going to work together on this. But like, if you hit 0 hit points, right, and you fail your death saving throws, something permanent is going to happen. And whatever that is, we're going to work together to discover that and build it into your character. Because, you know, I mean, listen, we've all killed a character early on in a game, and let's be honest,
unsatisfying.
It is very unsatisfying.
Like
it's
character death being exciting and cool requires a lot from the player and the GM already being synced up. And so like if you're just signing up for a game or whatever, or if you're in a casual session or you haven't been playing with people for a while, character death isn't going to be a critical role level of character death, of drama and like ding. And like it can be.
Right.
Yes, like 100%. I love those moments. I don't have a ton of them from my games. I think that if somebody wants to explore that part of a character and that experience, obviously, yes. Like you want stakes in your games. You want your players to know if they can die. But also they might be like, hey, I know I just died. I like playing this build. You know, and then you get like, oh, it's their cousin that just joined the campaign all of a sudden, and it's the same
because
character.
they want to play that character. Right.
So they might not be open to character death.
Dying.
That's okay.
Right, exactly. It is 100% okay because like you want your players to be connected to their characters, right? You want them to be excited to play their characters. And you don't want to rip that away from them for no reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sucks because they are always going to essentially refill that gap with that character, but with a mustache.
I love it.
So I really
sometimes
like
it's fun to do that too. Like that's totally fine. Like it just
for sure, but it depends on the tone of the campaign. Too, right? You know, if you're playing a super grim dark type setting and then, you know, Ed dies and it's like, oh, it's me, Eduardo. Like
take weird character concept back in the day. Not that long ago, it's like 2 years ago now. But in one of DJ's campaigns, our buddy of ours was playing sentient driftwood as a character basically, and he was like a hive mind spore druid, all this stuff. Oh my gosh, help me out. How did he then change? Did he die?
So he realized that there were gaps in the party that needed to be filled, but he didn't want to unoptimize Pebble.
Yeah.
And so what we did is we kind of talked about this, and he was like, hey, I'd like to kind of change now that this campaign's kind of going more for a full campaign route. How about, you know, we do this? And so I worked with that character to make sure that, you know, the character survived. But instead, like, had a change, right? And so
they became a different character altogether,
with the same body, but slightly changed.
Same memories, all that stuff.
Exactly. Because the backstory of their character is they were a like Andrew said, driftwood with a fungus on it from the Underdark. And essentially they had absorbed the memories of the people that they fed on as fungus, right? The spores.
The already dead people.
The already dead people, right? The people who didn't make it through the Underdark. And so like one of the things about his character was, you know, there was his creator, you know, was just like an artificer who worshipped Sylvanas, and like basically he brought him in and like built him, and then, you know, had him come to life as like kind of like a not a golem, but a construct. And Pinocchio, yes, it was the story of Pinocchio. And
just
then
a driftwood what was the class or the race?
It was Warforged.
Yeah, Warforged. Yeah.
It was a driftwood Warforged, and then, you know, prayed to Sylvanas, and you know, made him a real boy,
you
right?
Wish upon
Exactly. Hey, watch.
No more words. No words.
No more words. And it was nice to like narratively allow a character to change, right? And it's cool because Candela Obscura allows that without having to go to those lengths.
Yep.
Right?
100%.
And that's the thing, is like we had to go through huge narrative, like, just to make it happen.
Yeah.
And then with Candela Obscura, it's like, oh, you have taken enough injuries that the change is now starting, right?
Yeah.
And it could be a literal scar, it could be a figurative scar.
Yep.
But all that matters is that it changes an aspect of your character, you know, semi-permanently.
Now we need to sort of do a quick take a quick moment here to name your scar. I called it just Fear of Reflections. Like, it's not a deep-seated phobia or anything like that, but you do feel uncomfortable around reflections. What sort of change to your character should you want to make? You need to take away 1 point from one action and put it into another one.
1 point from one action and into another one. So we're going to remove from my focus.
Okay.
And we're going to put it in my sense, because I am going to be trying to not view reflections except for in the peripheral of my view. I'm going to try and keep them away from me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you guys will see. I'm sure we've probably sprinkled clips throughout, and we'll probably throw some here at the end for you to check it out. But the full playthrough is going to be available on our Patreon. We encourage you to go over there, follow us, support the podcast, support what we're doing. Take a look, enjoy the session. We had an absolute blast. Danil killed it. We also
Absolutely.
have a post-game interview that we recorded after our session with Danil and our friend Will, who played alongside us. Please enjoy, check it out. Consider adding some consequences and stakes in your game. Take a look at Candela Obscura, and yeah.
Danil was saying, like, if you're not an experienced role player, you're not going to know that freedom
Right.
of, like, I don't need to have a ability spelled out for me. I'm in a current situation. I have a thing I want to do. Here's how I think it can happen. GM, does this work? I thought this handled it really well. I really like how much it emphasizes RP, which, I mean, obviously, too, is also the GM who is running it right now, like, was definitely focused on that. But, like, yeah, the speed of play, the ease to get in, and then just the setting that comes with Candela is really engaging anyways.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I'm really into the whole, like, noir type, like, 40s thing, but, like, I really like how high the stakes get and how quickly they can ramp up. Like, that was terrifying. Like, the moment that dude jumped out the wall, I was like, okay, this is getting serious now. I did not see that coming.
What you see, Sheldon, is a reflection of yourself, but it doesn't mirror your movement. It just stares at you.
I don't like that.
It has a smile creeping up to the side.
Don't you smirk at me. We're coming.
As you say, we're coming. The reflection steps out of the wall,
The
surface, and it's like a figure that's made of molten wax. Its hue has your face with this angry smirk that grows wider than humanly possible, just revealing just a black maw. And it starts like moving towards you as it grows and takes in the slime around it. Like with every step, it gets bigger, and there's this slime like appendages growing on it as it charges towards you. What do you want to do? You have the initiative here, as you rolled pretty well. You were somewhat prepared.
Started blasting.
Oh gosh.
I feel like running Candela requires a lot, right? It requires, because like there's a much deeper, to actually like run this game for people. You have to think of so many different angles and the information that they're going to find, or that they're is going to be available to them. So that is a lot.
and this is not at all a critique of Danil. I think that you have to, with a investigation, you have to do a certain balancing act between things making sense and just putting the players on a railroad because you don't want them to blumber about, right? Like, to heavily prescribe how an investigation needs to go for it to be successful in advance, and then have it be a puzzle for your players to figure out is bad GMing, I think. If you're not like really thoroughly, like, you're not going to get that lucky, right? Like, they're not just going to stumble into your perfect narrative. They're going to have their own player chaos that takes them in a different direction, and you need to be able to flow with that narrative. So this, more than like a dungeon crawl, is going to require that kind of GM flexibility, or just literally the most amount of prep that any GM has ever done. It's one or the other. And you
Right.
have to have multiple solutions and like threads for them to follow to the next location. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, or you just make the beats really easily, right? And then all
Mm.
the investigation things are just things that can help you in the fight later,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, but with this, like you nailed it on the head. Like by nature, I feel like this system requires a pretty high level of railroading,
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I'm okay with.
that's
Like,
fine, right? Like, not
yeah,
everybody wants to play a board game right now. Like, they're wanting to tell the story. And to the aspect of even how the gear system goes, this is a kind of more of an ethos thing, I think, for the design of this kind of system. It's it's not important that you perfectly planned in advance what gear to bring. It's important that there's a mechanical limitation on what you could have with you. That's it.
Yeah.
And so, as a result, in an investigation, if you take that same ethos, it's not important that the players truly unweave a real web conspiracy thing. Like, it doesn't need to just be a puzzle on that level. It can be, and that can be fun, but it's
Right.
more important that narratively they find their way there for I think a lot of players.
Yeah. I think he did a pretty great job with some aspects, right, of that where for example, when I was searching the desk,
Yeah.
right, and I just outright failed. Uh and I was attacked by slugs. I had my vision. I came back from my vision and I'm holding the thing that I need in order to continue the
Yep.
story in my
Yep.
hand. So I wasn't necessarily overly
That's
punished
smart.
for that failure, but at the same time, like, I took some I took I mean
it was
that was
brutal.
it was brutal.
It's like
Yeah, so
it,
yeah,
you,
when he said that, I was like, wow, you just maxed out two
yeah.
of your marks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a yes
It was
and
rough.
from the GM for narrative, right? So it's like
Yeah.
otherwise, like, consequence of failure doesn't matter, but consequence of failure should absolutely never just be a stop sign, right?
I
Right.
agree.
Like, it still needs to move forward. And so that was a interesting, kind of creepy narrative way for him to literally put what you need next in your hand, because it wasn't important that you did or didn't find that in a mechanical sense. It was important narratively. And so it still should happen. Otherwise,
Exactly.
what? We just fail this room and we get
Right, right.
nothing? Like, that's not interesting. What's interesting is now stakes are even higher for you. You might die, and you almost did. You still
Right.
got the notebook.
Plus, the nice thing
100%.
about that too is like you can almost set what the stakes are going to be based upon just the room they're in.
Yeah.
So, like as a GM, like you don't even need to think too hard about whatever. You're just like, okay, they're going into this room.
Mhm.
Everything in here is going to be like this, and it's blatantly obvious that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
think-
like that progression from the character like side
Yeah.
ramped up really nicely and added like a very nice pacing to it.
Yep. I would definitely be interested in, especially after this, hearing about Blades in the Dark, and more powered by the apocalypse
Yeah.
type based things. I know that we had a little bit of an attempt with Avatar at the
Oh, right.
at
Our
Gen
demo.
Con, right? So it's like I feel like I have a little bit more of a grasp, even
Yeah.
though they have different rule sets. So that'll be interesting once we're able to jump into that. But I would definitely play Candela again.
I would run
And yeah.
Hellboy. Like, I would run it more modern,
Ooh,
and I would
yeah.
run Hellboy. That
Yeah.
would be so fun. I mean, it would introduce a bit more combat flavor, but again, you could run it the same way that we just did. Like, in our
Right.
makeup, if we made us the Hellboy crew, like
Right.
Will was
Erno,
Hellboy.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I was
Mhm.
what's his name? The fish man. Oh man, my brain's not working. It's been a minute since I read Hellboy. Abe. And
Abe, yeah.
like so
Abe
like
the Sapien.
Abe Sapien. There we go.
Yep.
And so like like there was a lot of that dynamic, and you could just change the setting out for whatever kind of like episodic light horror cop show that you
Yep.
liked watching, whether it was iZombie or like Supernatural or Hellboy, whatever. Like it fits that whole play style really well without just literally blumbering around an infinite city and trying to do really overly complex, house by house crawl for an investigation. Like,
which is why D&D is like, I would say D&D is bad at that stuff.
100% bad
It
at that.
takes way
Yep.
too long. There are way too many unnecessary rolls. Like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but if you're writing something and you're making your players make like 20 perception checks just to walk through this place, like, you're messing up.
Yeah,
Right.
that was like at Gen Con. There was a GM that did a good job. I mean, it's a convention, it's a lot. I'm not faulting them or anything, but the amount of times that I was like just trying to like know what was in the room that I then was required to make a perception check before even knowing what was in the room. It just reminded me of starting back in 3.5. And it,
Right.
it felt
Mhm.
it's just an older school of play. Um that just functions more like a board game. But I would pretty emphatically say I don't think, as a rule, that the answer should just ever be like, nope, you don't find anything, move on. Like that just,
No, to
Right.
find something else.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Or you
I
find
mean,
out the wrong thing, which never really
right.
happens.
Or as a GM, you're like, hey, I don't have anything for what you're looking for right here. Like that's like a point of order moment sometimes if it's really egregious where you're like, no, 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 this is not working. Like if you messed up as a GM, that's an opportunity to actually
Yeah. It's just a door.
be real and just be like, yes, just go through this and move to the next thing. Like
I
that's
literally
totally
had that
fine.
happen a couple of times, right? Because I'm running The Darkest House by Monty Cook
Yeah.
Games Monday nights right now for one of my crews. It's just kind of like a little side track that they're on, and a big part of it is exploring the house. And like, I told them, I was like, hey, if something looks out of place, right, like it
Yeah.
might be out of place, but also like it might just be sloppy building
Yeah.
on my part because I built it fully in Tailspire. And so like they saw a piece of paper on the ground. I was like, awesome. They saw the piece of paper on the ground, right? It's not things that are hidden from them. Obviously, if it's hidden from them, I don't put it there.
Yep.
But there's been a couple of times where like they want to just hang out in this room, and I'm just like, you guys get to the point that you feel you're fairly certain that you have overturned everything and that there's nothing left to be seen in this room.
Yeah.
That way, they just move on.
Right. It's
So
like
yeah,
it's one of those things where it's like once you've started to open the door literally of like poking over every nook and cranny, things get a little crazy. And so like I think
yeah,
that games that drive narrative first and really build trust between the GM and the player of like, look, I'm showing you what you should see and I'm giving you opportunities to improve upon that and make more connections and build a better narrative. I'm not here as
Right.
a stopgap at you getting to the next location. Adversarial DMing is hopefully more uncommon these days, but really not something I've encountered a lot of over the years.
yeah,
But it's talked about a lot.
right. Oh, for sure.
I've had it happen once, and this dude would like legit hide his rolls, or like you'd hear him re-roll.
Uh,
It's just like,
why?
dude,
I
why?
actually had
Why?
advantage on that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, when I first started GMing, was feeling that tension, right?
Mhm.
And like we can get into a whole episode one
For
day about
balancing?
fudging
Yeah.
rolls and stuff like that and rebalancing. I rebalance stuff on the fly sometimes. It's controversial. I
Like,
usually
oh, that
don't,
was a lot. Here's an extra
Yeah.
50 HP.
but that's where like I think at the end of the day, your values as a GM really need to be explicit for yourself. So like for me, it's like, is it more interesting? That's the question I ask myself. And again, that's the question of narrative. Is it more interesting that they fail this, or is it more interesting that they succeed? Honestly, that
Right.
is a question that is actually promoting the narrative for them as a player, and you're advocating for them for the story, as
Yeah.
opposed to is it important for me to hide this from them? And is this going to blow up all my plans and my world and whatever? Like if it does, honestly, that's okay. It's your plans and your perfect campaign's a lower priority sometimes than the interesting thread where a player's actually invested and wants to like discover a thing. Not that they should derail the whole campaign. That's a communication issue that you can deal with. But like
Right.
it's okay to be like, that happened. I didn't prep for it, didn't plan for it, and it messes up next session's planning. Well, welcome to D&D. Time to go change next session's plan. And that happens. But yeah, I think Candela, with its narrative focus, it does ask a little bit more of a theatrical GM. But I think that, to Danil's point at the end there, I could pick up once I knew the rules, right? I don't think I could. I don't think I would have a hard time running a session with zero prep. Like,
Yeah.
because if we reduce that session down, it was mirror needs to be broken. That was it. Like that was the whole session. We needed to find the mirror, which we did, and it
Yeah.
needed to break for it to stop. And we could save people. There were a lot of possibilities along the way. All that he needed to do, he knew he was going to have a couple locations for us to be able to investigate, and he had a location for a climax. I think that's in the rules for how you design these episodic narratives, but at its core, that's really low requirement on prep. All he had to
Right.
go was, I have 3 victims, I have 3 locations to investigate, I have 3 clues. That's 9 nouns you need to write on a piece of paper. That's it. Or just be able to come up with on the fly and make those connections. So
Right.
I think zero prep. This could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's fair.
Not that that would make the best session. I'm just saying, as
No,
far as
but yeah.
systems that you could just go, bang, done.
Just a nice drop in.
Yeah.
Drop in, drop out. You had talked about like rebalancing on the fly. And I feel like that's something that I have to do to depending on the players, right? Make things a little bit more challenging because they get smart.
Yeah.
They pull a Jake and oh, I did 250 damage in this round, and it's like, how? And then you just go through the list. um so I'm not exactly sure how rebalancing in Candela would work, right?
I don't know.
As
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
you're setting, it kind of comes again from narrative, right? Is what I'm going to
yeah,
assume. So like, because we already know that there's no DC adjustment. It's a similar experience I had GMing Cypher for the first time. It was like, I don't get to rebalance, right? I don't get to fudge my rolls. I don't get to do a lot of those things because I'm being transparent with my players up front at what the success condition is and what consequences
right,
could look like. So for
yeah,
Danil, he was saying, this is a high risk scenario. What does that mean to all 3 of us? I'm going to take marks against my brain, my bleed, or
right,
my whatever body. And I'm going to if I fail. So that means I need to
yeah,
hit a 6. So how much do I want to make that a likely case? And so like that's it. That's the whole transaction. Whereas in a D&D scenario, it's like the GM is obfuscating the DC usually, almost
Mm-hmm.
always,
Mm-hmm.
and they're obfuscating health. Um, I don't think there's a right answer for if it's wrong or right to whether or not you should adjust those 2 things on the fly in the middle of a D&D game. It's your table. Just make sure they know that you do that. If your players
right,
find out you're fudging dice rolls and changing DCs on the fly, it might ruin it for them. So I would
yeah.
advise you to try and stick as true as to what you prepped as possible, and to
I
only
will.
divert when it feels like you are putting the narrative and player enjoyment ahead of what you prepped.
If I'm going to get hit with something, I want to know what the number is before I say I cast shield. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Not wasting spell slot.
For sure.
Yeah, but then you got like counter spell, like what level is the spell I'm countering? Like you get into a lot of that. And again, like that just is that's
Yeah.
something you need to decide as a GM what you're okay with and make sure that it's representative of the kind of opt-in your players have for that.
Right.
I feel like when I'm running my Cypher game for you guys, there's trust there. And also, like I said, there's a lot more just upfront. Like once I have said the level and you come out here with all your effort and abilities and you bring it to 0 and I just go, I can't say no, right? But that's actually nice sometimes.
But you can almost say
I can.
no. Right.
Yeah.
You can go, so GM intrusion.
Bam. Right. Like that's what I'm saying. Like you're not diverting in Cypher in that situation. You're not diverting from the rules. You are using them.
Yeah.
Whereas in 5e, changing the DC of something is not, it essentially is breaking the rules. So that is, again, something that is important to, as much as possible, think into what you prep. And if you screw up, that's fine.
Yeah.
If the monster dies too quickly because the one player novas the crap out of them and uses all their abilities that they made their character specifically to do that, give it to them. Don't take that away from them with a sponge of damage, right? Especially when they do, 250 health or damage to a 256 health creature, and then like the wizard does a cantrip and takes it out on the very next turn, and they don't get the kill. Like that sucks too. But like that's when you dealing with crunchier rule sets, just how you flow with it. Because sometimes I'll fudge health for a kill like that, right? Like if somebody does an insane amount of damage and they are 2-3 points away, I go, narratively, is it more interesting that they still have 1 hit point and that, what I'm going to do next with them is going to progress the narrative? Or do I just want to get another hit in?
Right.
Because is that important? Or is the fact that they just did a really, really cool move with tons and tons of damage and will be killing this anyway more interesting? I usually go for damage in that situation, but that is a fudge.
Don't forget to subscribe to whichever podcast platform that you enjoy. We will be growing and expanding as time goes on. I plan on releasing, just kind of like as a side thing, some actual plays on the feed, as well as our content here that we, us learning and sharing our experience with you and playing these games.
So yeah, click the like button if you're on YouTube, share this with a friend, give it to whoever. Help us out. We're growing, we're new. And also tell us what games you are playing that maybe have interesting stakes or ways that you've incorporated stakes into your games. Maybe you're playing Blades in the Dark and you've got some advice for us. Let us know in the comments. We want to hear from you and appreciate you from listening. Thanks for listening.